The Carpathian Mountains, late August 1873. Cold streams cut through granite. Fir forests climbed toward peaks that vanished into mist. In a valley called Piatra Arsa, the Burnt Stone, where landslides have stripped the mountainside bare, 300 workers hauled rock and timber up slopes that fought them every step. They dug 708,000 cubic feet of earth and stone from the hillside, removing it by cable car. They reduced the angle of the slope. They improved drainage. They prepared unstable ground to hold something that should not have been there. A castle. Not for defense, not for war, for summer, for escape, for a German prince who became Romania's first king and needed to prove something no amount of money could buy on its own. Peleș Castle. 170 rooms, 3,200 square meters, 41 years to complete, from 1873 to 1914. Built for approximately 16 million lei in gold, roughly $120 million in today's currency. The first castle in Europe entirely powered by locally produced electricity. Neo-Renaissance mixed with Gothic revival, combining Italian elegance and German rigor in proportions that defied the mountain beneath it. And beneath that beauty, beneath those innovations, a question that echoed through every gilded hall. What do you build when you are a foreign king ruling a nation that never fully accepted you as its own? If you enjoy deep investigations into 19th century European castles and the royal families who built them, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which property to explore next. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. Thank you for being here. The story begins not with architecture, but with survival. Carol I of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen arrived in Romania in May 1866 as Prince Karl, a 27-year-old German officer elected to rule a country he had reportedly never heard of. Romania itself was barely a nation, formed in 1859 of the union of Wallachia and Moldavia, nominally under Ottoman suzerainty, unstable, poor, agrarian, and desperate for legitimacy. They needed a foreign prince. European powers recommended a Hohenzollern. Karl accepted. It was not an easy throne. The Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871 nearly destroyed him. As a German prince ruling a historically Francophile country, distrust ran deep. Radicals attempted coups. On August 8, 1870, liberals in Ploiești arrested the police chief and prefect, occupied government buildings, and proclaimed the Republic of Ploiești. It lasted 24 hours. Karl survived, barely.
He was born on April 20th, 1839, in Sigmaringen, Prussia, the second son of Prince Karl Anton of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen and Princess Josephine of Baden. Educated at Dresden and Bonn, trained as a Prussian officer, serving in the Second Schleswig War in 1864. Disciplined, austere, meticulous. His wife, Queen Elizabeth, later said he wore the crown in his sleep. Cold, some said. Focused, others argued. A man who lived solely for duty. When he arrived in Romania, crowds gathered to welcome him. It had not rained in months. The day he entered Bucharest, rain fell. People saw it as a sign. He promised in French, because he did not yet speak Romanian, to protect the country's laws, its people's rights, and its territory. Within 2 months, the Romanian parliament adopted the 1866 Constitution, one of the most progressive constitutions of its time, modeled after Belgium's. It guaranteed private property, freedom of speech, total freedom of the press, abolished the death penalty during peacetime, and established separation of powers. But Karl never forgot he was German. He never forgot he was foreign. His lineage, his upbringing, his entire identity was Prussian, and Romania knew it. In 1872, Carol visited a remote valley in the Carpathian Mountains near a small village called Podu Neaglu, the Black Bridge. The scenery overwhelmed him. Peaks framed by forests, streams that ran cold and clear, air that felt pure compared to the dust of Bucharest. He purchased 5 square kilometers of land near the Piatra Arsa River. The estate was named the Royal Estate of Sinaia. In 1874, at his initiative, the village was renamed Sinaia after the nearby monastery. He decided to build a castle, not a fortress, a summer retreat, a hunting preserve, a place where he could breathe. But why build at all? What drove a king who had barely survived multiple coup attempts to pour millions into a mountain palace? The wound was simple. Carol had no heir. His only daughter, Princess Maria, was born on September 8, 1870. She died of scarlet fever on April 9, 1874, at 4 years old. Queen Elizabeth never fully recovered. They had no other children. The dynasty Carol was supposed to establish felt fragile. His elder brother, Leopold, renounced succession in 1880 in favor of his son William, who in turn renounced his claim in 1886 in favor of his younger brother, the future King Ferdinand. The line continued, but through nephews, not sons. Carol understood impermanence. He understood that legacies required more than blood. They required monuments. Peleș Castle became that monument.
Initial construction began on August 22, 1873, when the foundation stone was laid. Several auxiliary buildings were constructed simultaneously: the guards' chambers, the economat building, the Foyshore hunting lodge, the royal stables, and a power plant. Carol commissioned multiple architects. The first, Wilhelm von Doderer, a professor at the Technische Hochschule in Vienna, submitted 3 proposals in 1873. All were rejected. They lacked originality, Carol said. Too costly, he added. They were copies of French Renaissance chateaux in the Loire Valley or Viennese buildings on the Ringstrasse. Carol wanted something different, something that reflected both his German heritage and his adopted Romanian kingdom, something grand but not garish, functional but beautiful. German architect Johannes Schultz won the commission by presenting a more original plan, a grand palatial alpine castle combining features of Italian and German architecture following neo-Renaissance lines with Gothic revival accents. Schultz took charge of the first phase of construction from 1879 to 1883. The building resembled a Swiss chalet decorated in the German Fachwerk style, exposed timber framing over stone and plaster. Construction demanded extraordinary logistics. The site was landslide-prone. Workers spent 2 years, 1873 to 1875, preparing the ground. 300 men dug, hauled, and stabilized. They excavated 708,000 cubic feet of rock and dirt, unloading the top of the slope to reduce pressure. Excavated earth was removed using a cable car, a marvel of engineering for the time. A railway line was built from Ploiești to Predil in 1876, crossing through Sinaia. This facilitated the transportation of construction materials brought from across Europe. Stone came from local quarries. Timber came from Carpathian forests. But specialized materials, stained glass, tiles, marble, fabrics, metalwork, came from Germany, Italy, France, Austria, and beyond. The workforce was multinational. Queen Elizabeth wrote in her journal, "Italians were masons, Romanians were building terraces, the Gypsies were coolies. Albanians and Greeks worked in stone. Germans and Hungarians were carpenters. Turks were burning brick. Engineers were Polish, and the stone carvers were Czech. The Frenchmen were drawing, the Englishmen were measuring, and so was then when you could see hundreds of national costumes and 14 languages in which they spoke, sang, cursed, and quarreled. 300 to 400 men at peak, 12-hour days during intense construction phases. Injuries were common: falls, crushed limbs, exhaustion. Some died. Their names, with only a few exceptions, have disappeared from the record. Peles became the first structure in Romania erected on a reinforced concrete foundation. It was also the first castle in Europe to be fully powered by locally produced electricity, installed in 1884 with its own generator. In 1897, a hydropower plant was constructed using waters from the nearby Peleș stream. Construction slowed during the Romanian War of Independence against the Ottoman Empire in 1877–1878. Carol personally led Romanian troops during the Russo-Turkish War, assuming command of the Russo-Romanian army during the siege of Plevna. The defeat of the Ottoman Empire secured Romanian independence. The Treaty of Berlin in 1878 formally recognized Romania as a sovereign nation. On March 15, 1881, the Romanian constitution was amended to proclaim Romania a kingdom. Carol became King Carol I of Romania. On May 10, 1881, he was crowned with the steel crown, forged from the steel of an Ottoman cannon captured at Plevna. But the castle continued. Plans grew larger. Extensions were added. In the 1883 inaugural journey of the Orient Express from Paris to Bucharest, passengers were invited to Peleș Castle by Queen Elizabeth. King Carol I ceremoniously placed the last brick to celebrate the castle's completion, though work would continue for decades. The official royal ball of inauguration was held on October 7, 1883. The two-story building proposed by Schultz was decorated in Fachwerk style, but Carol wanted more. In 1890, the Moorish Hall was built on the site of the Southern Conservatory, designed by French architect Émile-André Lecomte de New, a disciple of Eugene Viollet-le-Duc. In 1894, Czech architect Karel Lehmann was appointed to lead the works. Under his supervision, between 1895 and 1897, the Chapel of Queen Elizabeth, the apartments of the Princesses of Wied and Hohenzollern, and the mezzanine were designed. Between 1908 and 1911, the Armory Halls and the Florentine Hall were completed. Between 1907 and 1911, the Honor Hall was built, the main reception hall of the castle, decorated in German Renaissance style with Baroque accents, inspired by the Friedenhagen Hall in Lübeck. The chess hall and the billiards hall were added. Between 1911 and 1914, the terrace was decorated with busts of Roman emperors, and the council hall was designed. The castle was not truly complete until 1914, the year Carol I died.
A day at Peleș Castle began long before the royal family woke. 4:30 in the morning, 5 at the latest. Kitchen maids lit the coal ranges, massive ironed beasts that heated ovens and water for an entire day's cooking. Scullery maids hauled buckets of water despite Peleș having modern plumbing. The house had running water, which was a luxury, but the kitchen still depended on constant manual labor. Housemaids moved through reception rooms, cleaning grates, laying fresh fires, dusting furniture that had been dusted yesterday and would be dusted again tomorrow. The house had to be fully awake and functioning before anyone upstairs opened their eyes. Step past the showpiece rooms and the other face appears. Behind the beauty lies infrastructure. Deep in the basement, service corridors painted institutional green and lit by bare bulbs weave a second circulatory system through the building. Staff move along these arteries unseen, so fires are lit before dawn, water runs hot before anyone wakes, and breakfast appears the moment it is wanted. Service staircases, narrow and unadorned, hidden from guests. Separate doors, separate entrances, the architecture of invisibility. The hierarchy below stairs was rigid. At the top, the head steward and housekeeper. Beneath them, valets and ladies' maids, those who dressed the family and guests. Below that layer came footmen and housemaids. Lower still, the kitchen staff. And at the very bottom, scullery maids and hall boys, teenagers doing the filthiest work for the smallest pay. Everyone knew their place. Crossing a boundary meant consequences. The bell system controlled movement like a nervous system. Every major room upstairs had a bell pull. When someone tugged it, a corresponding bell jingled downstairs in the servants' corridor. Springs and wires ran through the walls, connecting the two worlds. Each bell had its own tone. Experienced staff could identify the calling room by sound alone. When a bell rang, somebody moved immediately. The family and their guests did not wait. What the servants actually earned is difficult to determine with precision. Peleș Castle's detailed wage ledgers are not as publicly accessible as those from British estates. However, by comparing to similar royal households of the era, wages likely ranged from modest sums for scullery maids to more substantial amounts for senior staff. The exact figures remain largely unrecorded. What is clear is the fundamental disparity. Karl I routinely spent thousands on a single painting or piece of furniture. The castle's art collection alone was estimated at 60,000 objects. Construction costs reached 16 million lei in gold, approximately $120 million today. By contemporary standards, Karl I was not a notorious tyrant. The castle was well maintained. Staff positions were sought after. Working at Peleș meant working at one of the great houses. Some servants stayed for decades, which suggests conditions were acceptable, perhaps even preferable to alternatives. Yet the awareness of difference never disappeared. The distance between those who serve and those who are served was built into the architecture itself. Kindness from a position of total control is still a form of control. A gentle master is still a master. The servants' quarters were in the cellars and attics, small rooms shared among several, plain walls, minimal furniture, nothing resembling the gilded splendor upstairs. They ate separately, they lived separately. They existed in the shadows. Staff move along these arteries unseen. The corridors connect the kitchens to the service elevators. The service elevators connect to the upper floors. On each floor, hidden doors, designed to blend seamlessly with the wood paneling in the main rooms, open onto these passages. A servant could emerge, deliver a tray, and disappear again without guests noticing where they came from or where they went. Service staircases, narrow and unadorned, hidden from guests, provided vertical circulation. These stairs were steep, each step perhaps 8 inches high to save space. The treads were narrow. Carrying heavy loads up these stairs, trays of food, buckets of coal, baskets of laundry, required strength and balance. Falls were common. Twisted ankles, bruised shins, occasionally something worse. The servants' quarters were scattered throughout the castle's service areas. Kitchen staff slept near the kitchens, in the basement. Housemaids and footmen slept in the attic spaces under the eaves. Ladies' maids and valets, the personal servants of the family, had slightly better accommodations, small rooms on the upper floors, closer to those they served. The rooms were small, perhaps 8 feet by 10 feet, shared among 2 or 3 people. A bed, a washstand, a small chest for personal belongings. A chair if you were lucky. The walls were whitewashed. The floors were bare wood. A single window if the room faced outward, none if it faced an interior courtyard. In winter, these rooms were cold. The heating systems that warmed the family's apartments did not extend to servant quarters. In summer, under the roof, they were stifling. The hierarchy below stairs was rigid. At the top, the head steward and the housekeeper. These were positions of genuine authority. The head steward managed the male staff, controlled access to the wine cellar, oversaw the dining room service, and handled household accounts. The housekeeper managed the female staff, controlled the linen closets, oversaw cleaning and maintenance, and held the keys to every locked door in the castle. Both answered directly to the king or queen. Just beneath them came the personal servants, valets and ladies' maids. These individuals dressed the family and guests, maintained their wardrobes, assisted with correspondence, and accompanied them when traveling. The relationship between a lady and her maid could be intimate. The maid knew everything, saw everything, heard everything. She dressed her mistress, styled her hair, laced her corsets, and kept her secrets. A good lady's maid was invaluable. A poor one was dismissed immediately. Below that layer came the footmen and housemaids. Footmen served at table, answered the door, carried messages, and assisted with heavy lifting. They wore livery, formal uniforms in the castle's colors, and were chosen partly for appearance. Height mattered. Footmen were expected to be tall, well-proportioned, and capable of standing motionless during formal events. Housemaids cleaned, made beds, maintained fires, and ensured the family's private rooms remained immaculate. Lower still, the kitchen staff. This was its own hierarchy. At the top, the head cook, often French, as French cuisine dominated European aristocratic dining. Below the head cook came sous chefs, pastry chefs, and general kitchen workers. Each had specialized roles.
One prepared meats, another prepared vegetables, another made sauces, another made desserts. During major events, the kitchen could employ 20 or more people simultaneously. And at the very bottom, scullery maids and hall boys. These were often teenagers, sometimes as young as 13 or 14. They did the dirtiest work for the smallest pay. Scullery maids washed dishes, scrubbed pots, cleaned floors, and hauled water. Hall boys carried coal, emptied chamber pots before modern plumbing reached every room, polished boots, and ran errands. The work was backbreaking, the hours were the longest, the pay was barely enough to survive. Everyone knew their place. Crossing a boundary meant consequences. A housemaid who spoke directly to the king without being addressed first could be dismissed. A footman who appeared in the main rooms without proper livery could be docked wages. A kitchen maid who entered the dining room could be sent away immediately. The rules were unwritten but absolute. Meals below stairs were segregated too. The upper servants, steward, housekeeper, valets, ladies' maids, ate in a separate room from the lower servants. They ate better food. They ate at a more civilized hour. They used proper dishes. The lower servants ate in the servants' hall, often standing, often quickly between tasks, from simple bowls and plates. The bell system controlled movement like a nervous system. Every major room upstairs had a bell pull. In the hall of honor, beside the fireplace. In the library, near the desk. In the bedrooms, beside each bed. In the dining room, under the table where the host sat. When someone tugged a bell pull, a wire ran through the walls, hidden behind the plaster and paneling, to the servants' corridor below. There, a corresponding bell jingled. The bells were mounted on a board, arranged by room. Each bell was labeled master bedroom, library, dining room, music room. Springs and wires connected the two worlds. The mechanism was simple but effective. A tug upstairs caused an immediate response below. Each bell had its own tone. The size of the bell, the length of the wire, the tension of the spring, all created subtle differences in sound. Experienced staff could identify the calling room by sound alone, without looking at the board. This mattered during busy periods. When multiple bells rang simultaneously during a dinner party, staff needed to respond instantly. Confusion meant delay. Delay meant displeasure. When a bell rang, somebody moved immediately. The family and their guests did not wait. A delay of more than a minute or two was unacceptable. The servant assigned to that area would drop whatever they were doing and respond. Enter through the hidden door, appear in the main room, receive the instruction, disappear again. The entire interaction might last 30 seconds. This constant surveillance shaped behavior. Servants knew they could be summoned at any moment. They could never fully relax. Even during designated break times, the bells could ring, and when they rang, you responded, always. What the servants actually earned is difficult to determine with absolute precision. Peleș Castle's detailed wage ledgers are not as publicly accessible as those from British estates of the same era. However, by comparing to similar royal households across Europe and drawing from scattered records that do survive, we can reconstruct an approximate picture. A head housemaid in the 1890s likely earned between 200 and 300 lei per year. A scullery maid earned perhaps 80 to 120 lei. The head steward drew closer to 500 lei, plus accommodation and food. A lady's maid might earn 250 to 350 lei, depending on her skills and her mistress's generosity. Footmen earned 150 to 250 lei. Kitchen staff wages varied widely. A head cook could command 600 lei or more, while a kitchen maid earned barely 100 lei. For the period and the region, these were competitive rates. Romania's cost of living was lower than Western Europe's. A skilled worker in Bucharest might earn 400 to 600 lei annually. A peasant farmer might see 200 lei in a good year. By those standards, working at Peleș offered stability, regular pay, and relative security. But context changes everything. Carol routinely spent thousands of lei on a single painting or piece of furniture. The castle's art collection alone was valued at millions of lei. Construction costs reached 16 million lei in gold, approximately $120 million in today's currency. A single Murano chandelier might cost more than a scullery maid earned in 5 years. The oriental rugs in the Moorish hall cost more than the entire annual wage bill for the kitchen staff. The hours were long. During normal periods, staff worked from roughly 5 in the morning until 9 or 10 at night, with breaks for meals. 16 or 17-hour days were standard. During major events, royal visits, diplomatic receptions, hunting parties, shifts could extend to 18 or 20 hours. Sleep was taken in short intervals. Exhaustion was constant. The risks were real. Burns from the coal ranges, cuts from kitchen knives, falls on the steep service stairs, respiratory problems from coal dust and poor ventilation, back injuries from lifting heavy loads, dismissal from minor infractions, and always the threat of losing not just income, but housing and references. A servant dismissed without a reference could not find employment elsewhere. The power imbalance was total. By contemporary standards, Carol I was not a notorious tyrant. The castle was well maintained. Staff positions were sought after. Working at Peleș meant working at one of the great houses of Europe. Some servants stayed for decades, which suggests conditions were acceptable, perhaps even preferable to alternatives in a poor agrarian country where opportunities were limited.
What the servants actually thought of their employers is only partly visible. Unlike British estates, where servants' memoirs and letters sometimes survive in archives, Romanian servants left fewer written records. Most were not highly educated. Letter writing was not common among the lower classes. What survives comes mostly from the perspective of the upper servants or is filtered through family records. Queen Elizabeth in her journals and letters occasionally mentioned servants by name, usually personal maids or long-time retainers. She described some as loyal, devoted, almost like family. This was a common aristocratic sentiment, simultaneously genuine and blind to the power dynamics that made such devotion economically necessary. From what scattered evidence exists, a complicated picture emerges. Working at Peleș was difficult, exhausting, and strictly hierarchical, but it was also stable employment in a country where stability was rare. The wages were better than agricultural labor. The food was regular. The accommodation, while plain, was secure. For many, this represented opportunity. Yet the awareness of difference never disappeared. The servants walked through hidden corridors while the family walked through gilded halls. The servants ate simple food in plain rooms while the family dined on French cuisine beneath crystal chandeliers. The servants woke before dawn and slept after dark, while the family kept gentler hours. The servants owned almost nothing, while the family owned 60,000 objects of art. Some felt pride. They worked at a royal residence. They maintained beautiful things. They were part of something grand. Others felt resentment. The work was hard, the pay was small compared to the wealth surrounding them, the hierarchy was suffocating. Most likely felt both, simultaneously, grateful for employment, proud of their skills, and aware that the system was fundamentally unequal. The Hohenzollerns were not notorious tyrants. By most accounts, they treated staff better than many of their aristocratic peers. Carol I paid on time. Elizabeth took interest in servants' welfare, particularly when they were ill. The castle provided medical care, which was unusual, but kindness from a position of total control is still a form of control. A gentle master is still a master. The servants' quarters were in the cellars and attics, small rooms shared among several, plain walls, minimal furniture, nothing resembling the gilded splendor upstairs. They ate separately. They lived separately, they existed in the shadows. And when tourists visit Peleș today, they walk through the Hall of Honor, admire the chandeliers, and never see those shadows at all. While guests dined upstairs, the kitchens below operated with near military precision. Multiple head cooks oversaw teams responsible for different aspects of meal preparation: breakfast, lunch, dinner, and elaborate multi-course banquets for visiting dignitaries required coordination across dozens of workers. Supplies arrived daily from Sinaia and surrounding villages: fresh meat, vegetables, dairy, flour, wine. Storage rooms lined the basement. Pantries kept dry goods. Ice houses preserved perishables before modern refrigeration arrived.
The dining experience upstairs was theater. Courses timed to perfection, dishes presented with ceremony, footmen in livery serving silently, invisibly. The illusion was seamless. The machinery that produced it was exhausting. Carol and Elizabeth lived at Peleș from May until November each year. The rest of the year, the castle sat mostly empty, maintained by a skeleton crew. During the summer months, the household swelled. Guests arrived from across Europe, royalty, politicians, artists. The castle hosted balls, concerts, hunting parties, diplomatic meetings. Every event required preparation. Every guest required attention. The castle's 170 rooms were lavishly furnished. Each room had a dedicated theme from world cultures: the Florentine room, the Turkish salon, the Moorish hall, the French room, the imperial suite. Themes varied by function: offices, libraries, armories, art galleries, or by style: Italian, Ottoman, Moorish, French, Austrian Baroque. Collections of statues, paintings, furniture, arms, and armor filled every corner. The collection of arms and armor alone contained over 4,000 pieces, divided between Eastern and Western war pieces and ceremonial or hunting pieces, spanning 4 centuries. Oriental rugs came from Bukhara, Mosul, Isparta, Saruk, and Smyrna. Porcelain came from Sèvres and Meissen. Leather came from Córdoba. Stained glass windows were created by workshops in Munich, 40 artists and technicians working for 3 years. Murano crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings carved from European walnut and exotic timbers. Franz Joseph I, Emperor of Austria-Hungary, visited Peleș Castle on October 2, 1896. He wrote afterward, "The royal castle, amongst other monuments, surrounded by extremely pretty landscape with gardens built on terraces, all at the edge of dense forests. The castle itself is very impressive through the riches it has accumulated: old and new canvases, old furniture, weapons, all sort of curiosities, everything placed with good taste. Artists visited often as guests of Queen Elizabeth, herself a writer known by the pen name Carmen Silva. George Enescu, Romania's most famous composer, performed in the music room. Sarah Bernhardt, the French actress, stayed at the castle. Jacques Thibault, the French violinist, played for royal audiences. The 60-seat theater featured Louis XIV French classicism style. The music room contained furniture carved from teak, a gift from the Maharaja of Kapurthala in India. The royal library held 30,000 books and had a secret unidirectional door that led to the king's suite. Unique manuscripts decorated in gold lined the shelves. The Hall of Honor, finished in 1911, spread over 3 levels, painted emerald green and covered in exquisitely carved dark wooden accents. Whimsical spiral staircases connected floors. The ceiling soared. The park and gardens covered 8 hectares. Landscape architect Fritz Rebhun began work in 1881. 7 rows of splendid terracing in the Italian neo-Renaissance style, richly decorated with statues, columns, and fountains, were created around the castle. The majority of the marble works were made by sculptor Raffaello Romanelli from Florence. The park and gardens were open to the public during Carl I's time. Seasonal visitors from Bucharest and beyond walked the terraces and admired the flowers. Peleș Castle represented more than a summer residence. It was a statement, a declaration that Romania had arrived, that Carl I, the foreign king, had built something permanent, that the Hohenzollern dynasty in Romania was here to stay. For a time, it worked. But beneath the splendor, pressure built. Carol I was not universally beloved. His pro-German sympathies during the Franco-Prussian War had alienated many. His secret alliance with the Triple Alliance in 1883, a political-military treaty with Austria-Hungary, Germany, and Italy, was kept hidden from the Romanian people and most of the government. Romania's purpose under this treaty was to support the Central Powers if they were attacked. But the treaty was conditional. Romania was obligated to go to war only if Austria-Hungary was attacked. Romanian society remained divided. Many looked to France and Russia. Transylvania, with its large Romanian population, remained under Austro-Hungarian control. Bessarabia was under Russian control. The dream of Greater Romania, uniting all Romanian-speaking territories, pulled the country toward the Entente, not the Central Powers. Carol believed in German strength. He believed in Prussian discipline. He believed in the alliance he had signed. But as the 20th century progressed, those beliefs increasingly clashed with Romanian national interests. The peasantry, which made up the vast majority of the population, saw little improvement under Carol's reign. Romania's economy remained overwhelmingly agrarian. Infrastructure improved, railways, bridges, roads, but wealth concentrated among the elite. A major peasant revolt in 1907 was bloodily suppressed by authorities. The tension between modernization and inequality deepened. Carol aged. His health declined. He had no son. The succession passed to his nephew, Ferdinand. The dynasty continued, but through a different line. Carol's legacy was architectural, not biological.
On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was assassinated in Sarajevo. Austria-Hungary issued an ultimatum to Serbia. Russia mobilized in support of Serbia. Germany backed Austria-Hungary. France backed Russia. On August 3, 1914, the Romanian Crown Council convened at Peleș Castle. Carol I wanted Romania to honor its secret treaty and join the Central Powers. The majority disagreed. The conditions of casus fortitudo were not met, they argued. Austria-Hungary was not attacked, it was the aggressor. Romanian public opinion was decidedly anti-German and pro-Entente. The dream of reclaiming Transylvania from Austria-Hungary was too powerful. Ion C. Brătianu, the prime minister, successfully advocated for armed neutrality. Carol I was humiliated. His secret alliance meant nothing. His personal beliefs meant nothing. Constitutionally, he could not overrule the Crown Council. Romania declared neutrality. Carol worked throughout September 1914 to foster links with the Central Powers. He failed. His pro-German sentiments, once an asset, became a liability. Contemplating abdication, isolated, watching his life's political project collapse, Carol I fell ill. On October 10, 1914, at Peleș Castle, King Carol I of Romania died at the age of 75. He died in the castle he had built to prove his dynasty's permanence. He died without seeing Romania enter the war he wanted. He died knowing his nephew Ferdinand, the new king, would face decisions Carol could no longer control. His death changed everything. The man who had signed the secret alliance was gone. The constraints he imposed vanished. Ferdinand I, influenced by his pro-Allied wife Queen Marie and Prime Minister Brătianu, waited, watched, calculated. On August 27, 1916, Romania entered World War I on the side of the Triple Entente against the Central Powers. The goal, reclaim Transylvania. The result, catastrophe. Within months, Bucharest fell to German and Austro-Hungarian forces. Two-thirds of Romania was occupied by December 1916. The royal family, government, and army retreated to Iași in Moldavia. Ferdinand's government was surrounded. Supplies dwindled. Russian support weakened and then collapsed entirely after the Bolshevik Revolution in November 1917. On December 9, 1917, Romania signed an armistice. On May 7, 1918, the Treaty of Bucharest was imposed. The terms were harsh. Romania lost territory. The Germans repaired oil fields around Ploiești and pumped 1 million tons of oil. They requisitioned 2 million tons of grain from Romanian farmers. These resources kept Germany fighting into late 1918. But Ferdinand refused to sign the treaty. He hoped for Allied victory on the Western Front. He was right. In October 1918, the Allies advanced on the Macedonian front. On November 10, 1918, one day before the German armistice, Romania renounced the Treaty of Bucharest and re-entered the war. The gamble paid off. The Treaty of Bucharest was nullified. Romania participated in the Paris Peace Conference. In 1920, the union of Bessarabia, Bukovina, and Transylvania with the Kingdom of Romania was recognized. Greater Romania was born. Ferdinand became the ruler of a vastly enlarged state. On October 15, 1922, Ferdinand was crowned King of Greater Romania in a spectacular ceremony in Alba Iulia, the historic princely seat in Transylvania. The coronation took place in the courtyard of the newly consecrated Coronation Cathedral. It was the culmination of Romanian national aspirations. Carol I had built Peleș Castle to establish a dynasty. Ferdinand inherited that dynasty and expanded it into something Carol never lived to see, a nation twice the size, uniting territories separated for centuries.
But what happened to the castle during the war? Between 1914 and 1918, Peleș sat largely empty. The royal family was in Iași. Staff were reduced to a skeleton crew. The castle was not requisitioned or occupied. Sinaia was not on the main invasion routes, but it functioned as a symbol of a dynasty in exile, waiting. When Ferdinand returned to Bucharest on December 1, 1918, Peleș reopened. Life resumed, but the world had changed. The Hohenzollern dynasty in Germany had fallen. Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated in November 1918. The German Empire collapsed. Ferdinand's distant cousins lost their thrones, but Ferdinand, the loyal, who had honored his oath to reign as a good Romanian, kept his. For this betrayal of his German origins, Wilhelm II had Ferdinand's name erased from the Hohenzollern house register. Ferdinand was excommunicated from his own family. He did not care. Romania was his country now. Between 1918 and 1927, Peleș served as a summer residence for the expanded royal family. Carol II of Romania, grandson of Carol I, was born at the castle on October 15, 1993. He lived there periodically during his tumultuous reign from 1930 to 1940. Ferdinand died on July 20, 1927. His grandson, Michael, succeeded him briefly. Then Carol II returned from exile to claim the throne, then abdicated again in 1940. Michael ruled a second time. The dynasty fractured. On December 30, 1947, King Michael I was forced to abdicate at gunpoint by the communist regime backed by Soviet occupation forces. The monarchy ended. All royal property was seized, including Peleș Castle. The Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen dynasty's rule in Romania, which began in 1866, ended after 81 years. The castle was opened as a museum in 1953. For tourists, mostly Romanian, it became a curiosity, a relic of the monarchy. The rooms were preserved but stripped of context. The stories of the servants, the workers, the builders, already largely invisible, were further erased. The official narrative focused on art, architecture, and royal glamour. In 1975, Nicolae Ceausescu, Romania's communist dictator, closed the entire estate. The area was declared a state protocol interest area. Only maintenance and military personnel were permitted. Ceausescu did not like the castle. He rarely visited. It represented everything he claimed to oppose: monarchy, foreign influence, elite decadence. Yet he could not destroy it. The castle was too beautiful, too historically significant. For 15 years, between 1975 and 1990, Peleș Castle sat closed to the public. The timber in some sections was infested with dry rot. Conservation issues mounted. The castle decayed slowly, quietly, hidden behind closed gates. On December 22, 1989, Nicolae Ceausescu fled Bucharest. On December 25, 1989, he was executed by firing squad. The Romanian Revolution ended 42 years of communist rule. In 1990, Peleș and Peleș castles were re-established as heritage sites and open to the public. Between 1990 and 2007, negotiations took place between the Romanian state and the royal house. In 2007, an agreement was reached. Peleș Castle, Peleș Castle, and the entire Peleș domain returned to the ownership of King Michael I, but continued to be administered by the Romanian state. The exception was Foișor Castle, which became the protocol villa of the Romanian presidency. King Michael I, who had been forced into exile in 1947, lived in Switzerland. He never permanently returned to Romania. He visited occasionally. He died on December 5, 2017, at the age of 96. The castle remained in the family, leased to the state. Today, Peleș Castle receives between 250,000 and 500,000 visitors annually. Tours are available year-round with seasonal variations. Standard entry costs approximately 30 lei, or $8 for adults, 15 lei, or $4 for students. Guided tours add 25 lei, or $7. Photography is permitted without additional fees. The tours focus on architecture, art, and royal history. Visitors walk through the Hall of Honor, the Armory, the music room, the Moorish Hall, the theater. They admire the chandeliers, the tapestries, the stained glass, the carved wood. Guides describe Carol I's vision, the construction process, the famous visitors. They mention the multinational workforce in passing. They rarely mention wages, hours, conditions. They do not discuss the peasant revolt of 1907, the workers who died during construction, or the fundamental power imbalances that made the castle possible. The castle is presented as a fairy tale, a masterpiece, a triumph of art and engineering, which it is, and it is also something more complicated.
So what do you build when you are a foreign king ruling a nation that never fully accepted you? You build a fortress that is not for war. You build beauty that outlasts politics. You build a monument that whispers permanence even as history undermines it. Peleș Castle reveals something about how power operates. Carol I spent 16 million lei in gold, $120 million today, to create a summer residence. He employed hundreds of workers for decades. He imported materials from across Europe. He filled 170 rooms with art worth millions more. He built electrical systems before most of Europe had them. He created gardens and terraces that required constant maintenance. And for what? Not survival, not necessity, but legitimacy, acceptance, legacy. The castle was Carol's answer to a question he could never speak aloud. How do you make a dynasty real when you are not the dynasty people wanted? You build something so magnificent that objections become irrelevant. You build something so permanent that future generations forget you were ever foreign. It worked. Sort of.
The castle stands. The Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen dynasty fell. Carol I died in 1914. Ferdinand II died in 1927. Carol II abdicated twice. Michael I was forced out in 1947. The monarchy ended, but the castle endures. What Carol I built was not just architecture, it was an argument. The castle argued that he belonged, that his dynasty belonged, that Romania deserved beautiful things, that beauty itself was a form of legitimacy. And in that narrow sense, he was right. The castle is magnificent, the craftsmanship is extraordinary, the ambition was realized. But who paid for it? The workers who hauled stone up the mountain, the servants who woke before dawn, the peasants whose grain fed the workforce, the forests logged for timber, the quarries stripped for stone. Their names are mostly gone, their wages are unrecorded, their injuries are forgotten. Their labor made the castle possible, and the castle erased them. This was not unique, this was typical. Every great house of the era operated this way. Wealth flowed upward, labor flowed downward.
The gap between those who commissioned beauty and those who created it was fundamental to the system. Carol I was not a monster. By the standards of his era, he was relatively fair. He paid competitive wages, he maintained the estate well. He did not abuse his position more egregiously than his peers. But fairness within an unfair system is still unfairness. Kindness within a hierarchy is still hierarchy. Who paid for it? The workers who hauled stone up the mountain, the servants who woke before dawn, the peasants whose grain fed the workforce, the forests logged for timber, the quarries stripped for stone. Their names are mostly gone. Their wages are unrecorded. Their injuries are forgotten. Their labor made the castle possible, and the castle erased them. This was not unique. This was typical. Every great house of the era operated this way. Wealth flowed upward, labor flowed downward. The gap between those who commissioned beauty and those who created it was fundamental to the system. Carol I was not a monster. By the standards of his era, he was relatively fair. He paid competitive wages, he maintained the estate well, he did not abuse his position more egregiously than his peers. But fairness within an unfair system is still unfairness. Kindness within a hierarchy is still hierarchy. Consider the arithmetic. 16 million lei in gold for construction, approximately $120 million today. Compare that to the wages of a scullery maid or a stonemason. Compare that to the cost of the peasant grain that fed the workers. Compare that to the value of a single day's labor by one of the 300 men who dug 708,000 cubic feet of earth from an unstable mountainside. The castle contains 60,000 objects of art. Each object was purchased, transported, installed. Each painting on the walls, each piece of Meissen porcelain, each oriental rug from Bukhara or Mosul represented someone's labor. The artist who created it, the merchant who transported it, the craftsman who installed it, the servant who dusted it daily. Beauty at this scale is not free. It never has been. The question is not whether the beauty is real. It is. The question is whether we are willing to see the full cost. Peleș Castle is also a story about what happens when nations change. Carol I built the castle as a German prince ruling Romania. He believed in German strength. He signed a secret alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary in 1883. He thought that alliance would define Romania's future. He wore his Prussian identity like armor. He was wrong. When World War I began in 1914, Romania chose the opposite side. The Crown Council, meeting at Peleș Castle on August 3, 1914, rejected Carol's lifetime of political work. They declared neutrality. 2 years later, under Ferdinand, Romania entered the war against the Central Powers, against Carol's allies, against his family. Carol died on October 10, 1914, at Peleș Castle, heartbroken and isolated. He died in the building he had spent 41 years perfecting. He died knowing his political project had failed. His secret alliance meant nothing. His German loyalties were a liability. His nephew, Ferdinand, who inherited the throne, would honor Romanian interests over Hohenzollern blood. And Ferdinand succeeded where Carol could not. Greater Romania was achieved in 1920. Transylvania, Bessarabia, Bukovina, all united under one crown. The dream Carol built Peleș to legitimize was realized not by Carol, but by the nephew who defied everything Carol believed. For this betrayal, Kaiser Wilhelm II erased Ferdinand's name from the Hohenzollern house register. Ferdinand became persona non grata in his own family. He did not care. Romania was his country now, not by birth, but by choice. The castle outlasted the dynasty. The castle outlasted the kingdom. Carol built Peleș to prove his dynasty belonged. The dynasty ended in 1947. The castle remains. What does Peleș Castle reveal about power? Not the fantasy version, the kings and crowns and ceremony, but the mechanics.
how power actually operates beneath the spectacle. First, power requires constant performance. Carol I did not simply rule Romania, he performed the role of king every day. The castle was the stage, every room was a set. Every banquet, every diplomatic reception, every hunting party was theater designed to convince skeptics that a German prince could be a Romanian king. The performance worked, to a degree. Carol reigned for 48 years. He survived coup attempts, foreign wars, domestic unrest. He transformed Romania from a poor, unstable principality into a kingdom recognized by European powers. The castle was evidence of that transformation. "Look what we have built," it declared. "Look what Romania can achieve." But performance has costs. Carol could never stop performing. He could never fully relax. Queen Elizabeth wrote about his exhaustion, his headaches, his inability to rest. "He wore the crown in his sleep," she said. The castle, meant to be a retreat, became another venue for the performance. Even in the mountains, Carol was on stage. Second, power requires infrastructure that remains invisible. The castle functioned because of elaborate systems most visitors never saw. Electricity generated on site, plumbing fed by mountain streams, heating systems requiring constant fuel, kitchens producing meals for dozens or hundreds, servants moving through hidden corridors, up hidden staircases, performing tasks that had to be done but could not be seen. The architecture itself encoded this invisibility. Separate entrances, separate staircases, service corridors painted institutional green, hidden behind walls. The family and guests moved through one world, the servants moved through another. The two worlds touched only when service was required. This was not accidental. This was designed. The castle's beauty depended on hiding the machinery that produced it. Guests admired the chandeliers, not the workers who cleaned them. They enjoyed the meals, not the kitchen staff who prepared them. They experienced comfort without witnessing the labor required to create it.
Third, power requires extraction. The wealth that built Peleș Castle did not appear from nowhere. Carol I's personal fortune came from his family, the Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen dynasty. But the maintenance of the castle, the operations, the staff wages, those came from Romanian state funds. Carol was king. The treasury served his needs. Where did the treasury's money come from? Taxes on peasants, tariffs on trade, revenue from agriculture, forestry, mining. Romania in the late 19th and early 20th centuries was overwhelmingly agrarian and poor. The majority of the population lived in villages, worked the land, and survived on subsistence agriculture. Their taxes funded the castle they would never enter. This was legal. This was normal. Every monarchy operated this way. But legality does not equal morality. The fact that something is normal does not make it just. The peasant revolt of 1907 revealed the pressure building beneath the surface. Across Romania, rural workers rose up against landlords, demanding land reform and fair treatment. The revolt was suppressed with military force. Thousands died. Carol I's government restored order, the system continued, and Peleș Castle stood untouched in the mountains, remote from the violence, insulated by distance and power. The castle was magnificent. The castle was also built on a foundation of extraction that most Romanians could not afford and would never benefit from. Both things are true. Fourth, power requires forgetting. Not everything, just enough. The things that complicate the story, the things that make the spectacle less beautiful. Walk through Peleș Castle today as a tourist. The guides tell you about Carol I's vision. They describe the multinational workforce: Italians, Romanians, Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Albanians, Greeks, Turks. They mention the 14 languages spoken on site. They emphasize the castle's technological innovations, the first castle in Europe fully powered by locally produced electricity. They show you the Hall of Honor, the Armory, the Moorish Hall, the music room, the theater. They point out the Murano chandeliers, the Sèvres porcelain, the Cordova leather,
the carved walnut, the stained glass windows created by 40 artists working for 3 years in Munich. What they do not tell you, unless you ask very specific questions, how much the workers were paid, how many workers were injured or killed, what the servants' quarters looked like, how the bell system controlled their movements, what happened to the staff when the monarchy ended, where the peasants' grain that fed the workers came from, how the 1907 revolt was suppressed. These facts are not secret, they are documented, but they are not part of the standard tour. They complicate the fairy tale. They introduce moral questions that tourists on vacation may not want to confront. This is how power operates through forgetting, not by destroying evidence, but by choosing which evidence to display. Not by lying, but by emphasizing certain truths and minimizing others. The castle is beautiful. That is true. The castle required exploitation. That is also true. Which truth gets more time in the tour?
So what do you build when you are a foreign king ruling a nation that never fully accepted you? You build a fortress that is not for war. You build beauty that outlasts politics. You build a monument that whispers permanence even as history undermines it. Carroll understood something profound. Legitimacy cannot be argued. It must be performed, displayed, built. Words can be debated. Buildings endure. A castle on a mountain filled with art from across Europe, powered by modern technology, surrounded by Italian gardens. This was an argument made in stone and glass and timber, an argument that could not easily be refuted. And it worked. Sort of. Carroll reigned for 48 years. He survived. His dynasty continued through Ferdinand, through Carroll II, through Michael I, until 1947, 81 years after Carroll's arrival. Not bad for a foreign prince ruling a nation that did not choose him. But the cost was high. Carroll died heartbroken, his political beliefs rejected by the very country he spent his life serving. His alliance with Germany was repudiated. His vision for Romania's future was abandoned. The castle he built to establish permanence became a museum, a tourist attraction, a symbol of a world that no longer exists. The castle stands, the dynasty fell. Which one mattered more? That depends on what you value. If you value art, architecture, craftsmanship, innovation, the castle is a triumph. If you value political success, dynastic continuity, the achievement of one's life goals, the castle is a monument to failure. If you value honesty about power, labor, and the costs of beauty, the castle is evidence of a system that produced magnificence through extraction. All three perspectives are valid. None resolves cleanly. Walk through Peleș Castle today, and you see what tourists are meant to see. Gilded rooms, priceless art, technological marvels. You do not see the service corridors unless you look for them. You do not see the servants' quarters unless you ask. You do not hear about the workers who died unless you research beyond the official tour. The castle is a mirror. What you see depends on how closely you look. If you look at the surface, you see a fairy tale. A German prince built a castle in the Carpathian Mountains and established a dynasty that helped unite Romania. The story has heroes, triumphs, romance, and architectural splendor. It ends with the castle preserved for future generations, a testament to art and vision and European culture. If you look beneath the surface, you see something more complicated. A foreign king desperate for legitimacy, a workforce exploited for nationalist ambitions, a monument built on labor that is invisible and unnamed, a system where beauty for the few required exhaustion for the many, a political project that failed despite decades of effort, a dynasty that ended despite the castle's permanence. Both views are true. The castle is magnificent. The castle is also a machine that consumed resources, labor, and lives to produce magnificence. The castle represents achievement. The castle also represents the limits of what individual ambition can accomplish when history moves in a different direction. These truths do not cancel each other out. They coexist. The castle holds them both. The question is not whether the castle should exist. It does exist. The question is what we do with that existence. Do we treat it as fantasy, as spectacle, as entertainment? Or do we treat it as evidence, as history, as a document of how power operated? Buildings do not choose their owners or their roles. People do. Carol I chose to build Peleș Castle. He chose to spend 16 million lei in gold. He chose to employ hundreds of workers. He chose to import materials from across Europe. He chose to fill the castle with art. He chose to create a dynasty monument. Those were choices, and choices have consequences. The castle was built. Workers were paid, or not paid enough. Servants woke before dawn. Peasants provided grain. Forests were logged. Quarries were stripped. Greater Romania was achieved, then partially lost. The monarchy ended. The castle survived. Was it worth it? Who benefited? Who paid? What was the true cost? Could it have been different? Should it have been? These are not rhetorical questions. They are real questions with no easy answers. The castle does not answer them. The castle simply exists, waiting for each generation to decide what it means. Today, Peleș Castle sits in the Carpathian Mountains, surrounded by forests and gardens, receiving tourists who photograph the terraces and admire the chandeliers. The tours emphasize beauty. The guides speak of art and architecture. The gift shop sells postcards and miniature replicas. The castle has survived a world war, a communist dictatorship, and the collapse of the monarchy that built it. It has survived because it is beautiful, because it is historically significant, because it generates revenue, because destroying it would serve no purpose. But survival is not the same as triumph. Survival is not the same as resolution. The castle stands because tearing it down would erase evidence, and that evidence matters. The evidence shows that beauty costs, that monuments require labor, that dynasties rest on foundations we rarely see, that foreign kings can build lasting things but cannot control what those things ultimately mean, that castles outlast the people who commission them, and the stories change with every generation. The Carpathian streams still run cold, the forests still climb toward peaks that vanish into mist, and Peleș Castle still stands, a monument to ambition, a machine of labor, a symbol of a dynasty that ended, a tourist attraction, a historical site, a piece of evidence that refuses to offer simple answers. The castle does not tell you what to think. It simply exists, waiting for you to decide what it means. The question is whether we are willing to look closely enough to see what it actually shows us.